Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
All of our guests today, including Chris Peters, who's standing by, brought to you by Alberni Power and Marine RPM Group. Before we get to Chris, let's update the poll question, if you don't mind, Rick.
Let's get her up, Ryan. The poll question today, and it is concerning Mr. JT Miller. Should the Canucks hold on to Miller until next year's trade deadline?
It's pretty close here.
Very close down the middle. No. 91% say no. 1,500 votes already. And we only
close to 1,600.
Yeah.
Yeah. When's the last time we had a poll question that was right down the middle, which is what all the bosses look for?
You know, John Shannon just told us, Donnie, that he wouldn't be surprised if JT Miller's in Vancouver to start the season. If they don't get through this week with a JT Miller a trade, Donnie, there's going to be so many people upset.
Okay, Delaney's okay tiring line in the inbox just ahead of Chris here.
Yeah.
My apologies to Chris Peters.
Yeah.
3-putt Shane. I'm 55. A diehard, loyal Canuck fan. If the Canucks hang on to Miller next season to just make the playoffs, I will renounce my lifelong devotion to this team.
Ooh.
Chris, a little bit younger, 3-putt Shane, rather, a little bit younger than me.
Yeah.
And he's one of these people who, like, I want to see, the parade before,
Yeah.
it's over.
It's
right?
It's been long enough.
Pick up some prospects.
The Canucks parade before your parade.
Yeah. Thank you. I think people know what I was talking about. Let's bring in Chris Peters, draft guru, NHL draft guru, for Daily Faceoff on his way to Flow Hockey. Chris, thanks for doing this. How are you, sir?
Doing great, guys. Good to be with you.
Good. What's Flow Hockey all about, by the way, before we get into the draft?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Flow Hockey is a streaming platform. It's part of Flow Sports, which has tons of different sports that it streams, and I just happen to be coming on at the right time. They're really growing the hockey side of the business. They've had streaming rights to the ECHL and recently acquired Hockey Tech, which is, they have Hockey TV and a lot of the rights for the junior hockey throughout North America. So I'm coming in to help boost up the hockey content that they already have and really expand on it. And it's a growing company with a lot of exciting things happening in the hockey space. So I'm really excited to be a part of it.
Well, it's nice to see a media member in demand. That doesn't always happen these days. Hey, where do you stand when it comes to Slipkoski versus Wright?
It's been a kind of a work in progress throughout the season. And I would say that at this point, when my draft rankings came out about a month ago, I had Wright ahead of Slipkoski. I had Logan Cooley 1, Slipkoski 3, and then Wright 2. And that's kind of been the way I've done it. And it's a little bit off the beaten path. It's not quite the way that the consensus has gone. But I'd say that as things have moved forward, I think there's a lot of really legitimate conversation about Slipkoski being the number one pick in this draft, mainly because, Shane Wright hasn't necessarily distinguished himself from the class. And Slipkoski's got that top line potential, a 6'4", 220-pound power forward that can score. That's a guy that I think a lot of teams are trying to find, to get a top line scorer like that. Shane Wright, is there a guarantee that he's a number one center? That's the question that I think a lot of people are asking. He hasn't necessarily progressed year over year the way that you would hope a player in his position would. Now, you have to respect the fact that he missed an entire season last year with the OHL shutdown, but there were other players that missed last season that didn't necessarily have the same kind of plateau in terms of their point production and just their overall game. So I think we wanted to see more from Shane Wright this year. So maybe he's a victim of his own expectations, but I think Slipkoski has really made a case for himself as being that higher ceiling player and a guy that looks a little bit more like a top line player as opposed to Shane Wright.
Yeah, we just had John Shannon on, Chris, and he compared him to Jaromir Jagr, or at least he talked about people who have compared him to Jaromir Jagr. Okay, your June 30th mock draft, you have the Canucks at 15, if in fact they keep the 15th pick, taking Finnish/Canadian forward Brad Lambert. What can you tell us about him? What does he bring?
Well, he's really actually one of the wild cards of the draft. And I thought, if you're going to be in the mid-range of the draft, why not take a swing, right? And I think Brad Lambert is one of the best skaters in this draft. He's kind of a polarizing prospect, though. Didn't have a great year in Finland, hasn't really progressed. I mean, there was a talk 2 years ago that this is the guy that's going to challenge Shane Wright for number one. And now we're talking about neither one of them potentially going first overall. It just goes to show you how development changes. But Brad Lambert is one of those guys where he's got that speed, skill, dynamic, and that dynamic ability is really something that teams are trying to hold on to and say, okay, well, there's that, but what else can he do? There are concerns about his ability to get into the interior. There are concerns about his game-to-game competitiveness, shift-to-shift competitiveness. Is he able to kind of find that next gear and that competitive drive to battle for his offense? He's always been one of the fastest guys, so he hasn't necessarily been challenged in that way. But we've seen little glimpses along the way of that high-end skill and scoring ability. He only got 2 games at the World Juniors this last year, but he was dominant in those games. And I think teams are trying to figure out, is he the guy that is that dynamic talent, or is there enough left on the table? Is he leaving more on the table? And what do we do with that? So he's a real developmental project, I think, for any team that drafts him. They have to understand the risks going in. I think the Canucks are in a position to maybe take a couple of swings. Yes, they need to grow their prospect system, and yes, we're talking about trades and everything else to try and build this team towards the future. But if you want to take a home run swing in that range, I think Brad Lambert might be the guy. But he is really one of the wild cards of this draft. Could go in that range, could go later, might fall out of the first round. We really don't know. It just depends on which teams are there and what they think of him.
Hey, Chris, the Canucks haven't had a ton of draft picks the last few years simply because they've traded away so many picks. But the team down the highway here does have a lot of picks. Seattle, 12 in this draft, including 4th overall. Who do you see going 4th overall to Seattle?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of how that top shakes out, because if Uri Slipkoski does go number 1, there could be a Shane Wright slip. I don't know if he goes number 2 to New Jersey. I don't know if he goes to Arizona for that matter. So maybe he's there for the Seattle Kraken. Otherwise, I think there's a real good chance that it'll be Logan Cooley, who's in that range right there, a dynamic talent. I've had him number 1 since the midterm. I think he's the most dynamic player in this draft. You've already got Matty Beniers, who you drafted last year in Seattle. Add that number 2 center, that more dynamic element, whereas Beniers is the guy that, is kind of that two-way player that kind of gives you that versatility, and get a Cooley, that'd be huge. Now, if, let's say, the top 3 forwards are off the board, I mean, there's a really easy path for the Kraken to address their defensive player, their defensive prospect pool with one of the 2 right shots. Simon Nemec, David Jiricek. Either one of them would be a good fit. Jiricek's the bigger guy. Nemec has had the better numbers. He's a little bit more offensively gifted. Both guys have that top pairing potential. I think they're more safely projected into a top 4, maybe a 3-4 situation. But both of them are really intriguing prospects, and that's a way that the Kraken could potentially make a big splash in this draft.
Dark horse pick, maybe a player, Chris, that not a lot of people are talking about that you're high on.
Yeah, I have kind of like a staple guy that, I think the public is high on him. I don't necessarily know if the NHL teams are as high on him as those of us that kind of do this, where we put out our draft rankings and things like that. And that's Lane Hudson. And Lane is a smaller defenseman. He's 5'8", 165 pounds at most. And we're kind of wondering, is he going to grow? Is he going to, because he has an older brother that did grow a little bit later. And there's been some studies, and he's had doctors look at him and say, hey, maybe there's more room to grow. If he doesn't, he wouldn't be the smallest defenseman in the NHL. But he is, to me, one of the most dynamic players in this draft, forward or defenseman. I think his puck skills are outstanding. He's got the ability to evade pressure. He's super competitive as well. He's actually got one of the best defensive sticks in this draft, I think, and the puck always seems to find him in the defensive zone. He's one of my favorites. He's a guy that I think if you draft him late in the first round, I do think that you're going to get high value, because he'll have a great chance. And played at the National Team Development Program and outproduced in this last under-18 year at the same age. Outproduced Quinn Hughes, outproduced Adam Fox at the same age. So that's nothing really to, you look at those numbers and you look at that historical comp in terms of production, and he's pretty exceptional. So I have a lot of love for Lane Hudson. And I understand NHL teams' hesitation to draft a guy at that size, but I really do think he's going to be a value pick late in the draft. Late in the first.
Flow Hockey has themselves something special, Chris. We're going to get you back on the show. Thanks so much for this. Appreciate it, my friend.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.